What's going on? All this multiple streams that are watching. This is a first mock draft show of the 2023 NFL offseason. Glad to be back with it. I got my boys Armand and Mike back with me. What's going on, y'all?
What's going on, everybody?
What's going on? Glad to be here.
Yes, sir. If y'all have paid attention to the description, it's going to be picks 1 through 4. Before we get into it, I want to quickly apologize to everyone that has been a follower of my show. It's been a lot of personal things going on. I have not done a show since December, but it's good to be back with my guys. And you guys ready to dive into this?
Ready,
sir.
All right, but before we get into it, we're going to talk about the number 1 pick of the draft, the Chicago Bears. But before we talk about them, let's get a quick preview on them. First up in the mock draft is the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears followed up their 2021 season in which they went 6-11, ending with the worst record in the league at 3-14. And despite several disappointing results throughout the season, Justin Fields broke out as a dual threat quarterback and ran for 1,143 yards and 8 touchdowns, which gives Chicago finally a true franchise quarterback for the first time in years. The Bears will enter this offseason with nearly $95 million in cap space, 7 draft picks, including the number 1 draft pick, which several reports have been emerging that Chicago will be trading back, with at least 6 or 7 teams coming up there to potentially trade for number 1. However, let's talk about the Bears' draft needs, position needs, and the current mock draft selections as if they will hold the number 1 pick. Now, let's talk about the Chicago Bears.
Justin Fields, otherworldly, stays in, steps out at the 9.
Yes, sir. As I said, we're going to talk about Chicago Bears as I posted into the actual preview. As you all know, they're probably not going to keep the number 1 pick, but we're going to talk about them as them having the number 1 pick. But I'm not going to lead this one off. I'm going to let one of y'all go first on what are your thoughts about the Bears going into this offseason? Hey, y'all, which one of y'all want to go first? Y'all want me to go first?
I could go first.
All right.
So if we're going to hypothetically say that the Bears are going to stay at the first pick, I believe it's going to be defense. And the options that will be present will be Will Anderson, the edge from Alabama, Jalen Carter, the interior defensive lineman from Georgia, would be probably the 2 options that will be there. I know that I've had some discussions with you, Nate, in regards to Jalen Carter, one of your guys, a great talent, and even with the recent, off the field issues that have presented themselves. Taking a defensive lineman in the top 10 that's an interior defensive tackle doesn't really work out relatively well for teams that have made those selections. So he is a very, very good player. And also the league has changed a lot with interior pressure. So if I had this pick today, I think I would select Will Anderson from Alabama for a fit for Matt Eberflus's defense.
All righty. I happen to agree. But first, I just wanted to give some historical facts. There's only been 12 number 1 picks traded since 1967. One of the more recent, as you can see in my brother Nate's background with the Atlanta Falcons in 2002. They traded with the Chargers a pick that would eventually be LaDainian Tomlinson, and the Falcons received the number 1 pick, and that turned into Michael Vick. I believe that it will behoove the Bears to trade the number 1 pick. However, as Nate said, we're gonna go as if they're not. So, really, you've heard some discussions about them potentially drafting a quarterback. I think that's kind of ludicrous, in my opinion. They traded draft capital earlier in the middle of the season before the trade deadline and got Chase Claypool from the Pittsburgh Steelers. That led me to believe that they believed in Justin Fields. They believed that they need to put more talent around him on the outside, more size, more speed at receiver. And you just don't trade that type of draft capital if you're not sure who your quarterback is, if you're not sure that, hey, we might need to take a quarterback in this year's draft. So I believe Justin Fields is there to stay. He's their franchise quarterback going forward, and he will be their quarterback on opening day whenever they play in the new season. With that said, I believe that the Chicago Bears will take Jalen Carter with the number 1 overall pick. He has generational talent. He moves, if you've looked at his tape, he moves as if he's 50 to 60 pounds lighter. That a man should not move, a man that big should not move as fast and quick and he's as agile as he is. That is insane. I can imagine being a running back or just even a receiver running a screen and trying to and having that huge man chasing me. Georgia has put out some outstanding talent, and I think this is going to be a hot take. I believe Jalen Carter has the chance to be the greatest defensive player under Kirby Smart to date when he plays his first game and starts his career. But yes, I think Jalen Carter will be the number 1 overall pick by the Chicago Bears.
All right. Before I get into what I thoughts, our boy Big Dog checked in and said, "Great choice." He picked. I know you picked Jalen Carter to go number 1. I know Mike did too. Buddy, what's going on, bro? What's going on, man? Okay,
Will Anderson.
Oh, you picked Will Anderson. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, again, I agree with both of your comments on it. Like we said, we're gonna hit it as if they're going number 1. So I hit a couple of needs for the Bears. Their number 1 need, even though the Bears need everything, I'm just gonna be honest with everyone. The Bears have almost $100 million in cap space, so some of these needs are going to get hit on next week when free agency start. As you all know, I'm a Falcons fan, so that may be our toughest competition on a lot of these top prospects because they're the only team ahead of us in regards to cap space. But one of their number 1 needs is a edge rusher. The Bears had 20 sacks as a team last season. That was the worst in the NFL. And guess who led the team in sacks? Free safety Jaquan Brisker. A safety led your team in sacks. That's a problem.
A rookie at that.
That's awful. They need everything up there in Chicago, but the edge rusher is going to be huge for them. My next need for the Bears is an interior defensive lineman. The Bears had the worst defensive line. Let's just make that clear. I mean, not just talking about sacks. They gave up 2,674 rushing yards last season and 31 rushing touchdowns. And let me make it worse for you guys. They gave up 200 yards in 5 of those games. They gave up 100 plus in 13 of them games. That is their number 1 need, is going to get somebody on that line, because if not, they're going to get pushed over every single week. Every single week coming up. If they don't get that thing straight, they're going to have another rough season, because if we're going to be honest, they are the worst team in the division. Maybe they're not the worst team in the league, if you ask me, because they got a little more going on for them than Houston do. But honestly speaking, they're not that far from the worst team in the league, just to be real with you guys. My next need I said they needed was an offensive lineman. They need to protect Justin Fields. He got sacked 55 times last season. And they're probably going to lose. Tevin Jenkins is the only guy on their offensive line that you can go look at and say, this is my long-term solution, because Cody Whitehair may get cut, because they're going to probably try to have as much cap space as possible going into the offseason. Next need I had for him was wide receiver. Who's their number 1? Chase Claypool? Darnell Mooney? They don't have a number 1 receiver out there. So that could be a potential option for the Bears going forward, because there's not a guy on that roster that you're going to say, this is my number 1 guy that Justin Fields can trust. And you don't want to get in a situation, shout out to my Baltimore fans that's tuned in, like Lamar Jackson, when you don't have a true number 1 receiver and you find yourself losing Justin Fields 3-4 years down the road. So you might want to get a hold of that right now. But I know I was saying on earlier what the mocks were going to say. So these are what the mocks are saying according to the ones I know is going to update because of the combine this weekend. But as of now, Walter Football does have them staying at number 1, taking Jalen Carter. Now, CBS was a little tricky. Ryan Wilson, Chris Trapasso, and Josh Edwards all have them trading back to number 4. They got the Colts coming up number 1 to take a quarterback, of course, but they got them taking Will Anderson. Kyle Stackpole, now this is an intriguing one for you, Mike. Kyle Stackpole has them trading down to number 8. And you know who's number 8 in the draft to take Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. And Sports Illustrated, Mel Kiper made a very, very interesting one, and I can't wait to see you guys' opinion on this one. They have the Bears trading back twice. They first have them trading back with Houston. They have them trading back with the Colts to take Jalen Carter. What are your thoughts on that one?
So that draft with Mel Kiper, so they would be trading back from 1 to 2 and then 2 to 4.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a wise idea for Chicago. Looking at assets, I know that Houston does have another first-round pick from the Browns from the Deshaun Watson trade. Actually, Houston, when we get to them, I think that they're going to be the only team in the top 10 that doesn't need to trade, in my opinion. But I think the Bears, what the Bears need to do is that if they're targeting a defensive player that they don't want to get out of the range to trade too far down, that they won't be able to select a player. I do think in a trade down scenario, I would say watch out for Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. He's 6'6", 271 pounds, really fits like that 3 technique potentially down the line with his athleticism. We know Matt Eberflus coached at the Colts, and he had players such as like DeForest Buckner, Al-Fareed Muhammad, who really generated a lot of pressure in a 3-4 defense. So definitely be on the lookout if that scenario does present itself.
How you feeling about that trade, potential double trade down, Mike?
It could potentially be ludicrous. If you think about past trades in the top 3 or 4, even top 10, the return on investment has been astronomical in some instances. Go back to the Ricky Williams trade with the Saints, traded the entire draft. So if they have a plan in place and they know that, hey, we need a lot to surround our players around, our young players around, our core around, then, okay. But you need to have a plan. You don't need to do it just because, hey, we don't know if this guy's gonna, project to be what most people think he's going to project as. You need to have a plan in place. I'm sure at this point, you knew that you're going to be in the area range to be a top 3 or 4 pick for over a year now. So I think they've had their scouts in place for quite a while. So if they have a plan in place and they believe that they can acquire maybe, around 10 more draft picks to add on to what they already have, then hey, so be it. But this isn't mattering though. With acquiring so many draft picks, you might not have that quick return on investment, or you might miss some guys. So you have that salary, you have that cap as well to put around to supplement your young guys. So if you have a plan and hey, we're gonna get 8 to 10 more draft picks, and we have enough cap space to bring in veteran guys, then hey, go for it. But moves like that can get GMs fired. So I would choose wisely.
I agree with that. Let me hit these comments real quick. Let's see. Nick checking in from YouTube said nowadays it's all about speed. Yeah, speed is definitely taking over the draft prospects now. So that's definitely true. What's going on? Dunn is totally checking in from Twitch said, I believe Will Anderson was going to be picked number 1. It depends on who stays at number 1. Like we said, we think Chicago, we're going based on Chicago staying at 1, but if Chicago doesn't stay at 1, it's probably going to be a quarterback. I cannot see it not being nobody but a quarterback if it's not Chicago. T-Man from Tiff Lane checking in from YouTube said Niner gang bringing some more else down. We're gonna cover you guys later down the road. I know you guys want to have a first. I don't think they have a first. I think their first went to Denver, right? And now New Orleans have it, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So y'all got anything else to say about the Bears before we move on to the next team? All right. They say they have nothing else to say about the Bears. The Bears got a long way to go. That's all we got to say about them. Okay. Number 2 on the board is going to be the Houston Texans. But before we get into them, let's hit another short preview.
Next on board, we have the Houston Texans. Last season, they finished 3-13-1. And although this was a clear rebuild, a few key pieces stood out, such as rookie running back Dameon Pierce, who posted nearly 1,000 yards on the ground and 4 touchdowns, giving the team a future franchise running back at the position. And rookie safety Jalen Petrie had a breakout campaign, finishing with 5 interceptions. Although there were some positives, this is a team in dire need of talent on the roster. And here's the bonus for the Houston Texans. Last year, the trade of former franchise quarterback Deshaun Watson gave them several picks, and the Texans were in a draft night with a whopping 11 picks, which include 2 top 15 picks and 5 in the top 75. Now we discuss the team needs, offseason expectations, and we will also cover the mocks projections for the draft in April. Now, let's talk about the Houston Texans.
All right, I'm gonna hit this Houston one first. Let me be as nice as possible about the Houston Texans. As I said earlier, they were the worst team in the league. They need everything, but we have to cover their biggest needs. But if I'm gonna be honest with everybody that's watching, they need everything. They need it all. Maybe even a kicker. They need it all. I have to be honest. They need everything down there in Houston. But again, it's a long rebuilding process for them. But they have, again, as I mentioned, they have the picks to do it. So that's they need everything. But I will go on my top needs for them. The first need, of course, is a quarterback. They clearly need a quarterback. They have Davis Mills calling plays for them. They need a quarterback. This is the draft to take a quarterback. So even if Chicago stays at number 1, they're not taking a quarterback. As Mike mentioned, they have Justin Fields. That's your franchise guy. You're going to have the shot at a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud unless the Colts decides to field frog and jump to number 1, which is still a possibility too. But again, they legit need a franchise quarterback for you to build around, because you really don't have anything to build around right now. So you got to go somewhere. You're not going to build around Dameon Pierce or Petrie that I mentioned. So you got to get your quarterback in this draft with no question. Their second need for me is offensive line. They need to overhaul that entire group. Laremy Tunsil is going to be a free agent after this season. He's going to command the market. He is not staying in Houston. Would you stay in Houston? And you're still one of the best left tackles in the league? Absolutely not. He's going to leave. And also, Justin Britt is probably another guy who's going to get cut. He was a veteran center for the Texans. And I know you guys pay attention to Pro Football Focus like I do. Scott Quisenberry was ranked as the worst center in the NFL last season. You should never want that title under your name. So you know they're going to upgrade that position too. So the Texans are going to probably go with them having 2 and 12. Is that correct, Armand? They have 12, if I'm not mistaken.
3-13-1 last year.
Okay, no, I'm asking their second pick. I know they're number 2. Is it number 12?
Okay.
Yeah, they're going to be picking. They're going to be picking at 12. Yes, that's correct.
So they'll probably go after a Broderick Jones or a Peter Sko. I don't want to mess his full last name up out of Northwestern. You know what I'm talking about. But they're definitely going to be looking at that position. Defensive line, they are in the Chicago position. They need it all on that defensive line. They had nobody on their team that averaged more than 5 sacks, not named Jerry Hughes. And he's 35 years old. He's about to probably retire soon, and you got to get some help in there. And as you all heard me mention that Chicago had a very bad rush defense. Guess who was number 1? It was Houston. Houston gave up 2,894 yards on the ground and 25 touchdowns. You better revamp that whole group, because DeMeco Ryans is not coming from San Francisco to coach a defensive line that's not going to get after the quarterback or not be able to stop the run. Wide receiver is another position I said they could go after, because Brandon Cooks was nearly traded last year. He's not staying there either. Nobody's staying on a team that's in a total rebuild situation like they are. And you got to give your quarterback something to work with. So that could be a possibility as their second first-round pick, maybe even a Quentin Johnson or Jackson Smith, depending on where the mocks kind of have him going at that point, because you just never know. You never know which receivers are going to jump up that board before it's all said and done. Linebacker was their other position that I said they needed. Christian Harris, shout out to Alabama. That's my boy Mike's favorite college. He had a good year for the Texans, but who else do you have at linebacker? And D'Amico Ryans is big on linebackers, as you saw at San Francisco. You saw that group did with Fred Warner and company. You know he's not going to deal with a group that doesn't have talent right there. But heading on the mock draft tip, Sports Illustrated has him trade up to number 1 to take Bryce Young, with Chicago to have Chicago going down to number 2. CBS Sports, Ryan Wilson has him taking CJ Stroud and Quentin Johnston. Christian Prosser has him taking Bryce Young and Jordan Addison. Josh Edwards has him taking CJ Stroud at Ohio State and Quentin Johnston. And Kyle Stackpole has him taking CJ Stroud and Jordan Addison as well. So that's my take on the Houston Texans. What do you guys think about the Texans?
I'll go ahead and go. Texans, like they said, that's a mess. But partly due to the efforts of former Alabama OC, now back with the Patriots, Bill O'Brien. He kind of helped, and then, the whole Watson debacle. But that's a pretty bad roster. That's one of the worst rosters I've seen in a while. Like, I believe that the Falcons had one of the worst rosters I had ever seen last year, 2021. And I think this roster is pretty bad right now. But they have some cap space that they can add to their draft capital. But D'Amico Ryans was a very, very above average NFL player. He was defensive rookie of the year his first season. The very next year, he was, I think, second team All-Pro. That's nothing to sneeze at. I think he made a total of 2 or 3 Pro Bowls. So he has been around for a long time. He was playing with one of those, in mid 2000s, 05 Alabama defenses. Those teams where they didn't have the offensive firepower, so they had to lean on their defense, and he was the captain of that team. So he's defense through and through, back to his defense coordinator days with the 49ers. So I was leaning on potentially going defense here, but I know he's smart enough, he's intelligent enough to know that you cannot win in this league without a quarterback. And if you have a chance to go and get your franchise quarterback, you need to do so. So I believe that they're going to take Bryce Young with the number 2 pick. But I just wanted to give some overview about how bad their roster is right now. On defense, they have Derek Stingley Jr. He had a decent year, but if you knew the height that he had on that 2019 LSU team, I don't think he lived, because people were saying he could have went top 5 if he would have came out as a freshman. I don't think he had that type of year. He was banged up at times, but him and Christian Harris, those are the stalwarts on that defense. Christian Harris was a big get. But the issue with drafting a quarterback, and while I'm saying they're going to draft a quarterback, is they don't have any weapons on offense, because I believe that Brandon Cooks will not be on that team next year. As Nate said, he wanted out, and they didn't do it. He actually, I think, missed a couple of games because he demanded a trade, and he made a comment like, they're playing with my career. He wanted to be out. At his stage in his career, he wants to compete for championships. And he knows that being in Houston, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But to dive even deeper, your quintessential number 1 receiver after Brandon Cooks, you projected to be John Mechie. He was out last year because he had cancer. So we don't even know how he's going to be this year. It's hard for players to come back from an injury when you miss an entire year, let alone cancer. So we don't even know if he's going to be the same player that he was prior. And another thing, he was coming off a torn ACL when he was drafted in the first place. So that's a big question mark. I know we're all rooting for him, but Chris Moore was their only other receiver that had more than 500 yards. The average casual fan doesn't know who Chris Moore is. Davis Mills, that was his number 1 receiver. He went to him, and Philip Dorsett had 40 targets. Philip Dorsett has been around for a long time, and when he's top 5 as far as targets, that's a problem. So they need offensive line, they need receivers. I feel like they have their running back position kind of set up with Pierce. He had a great year, but man, the way their roster is constructed, even by adding free agents to the draft capital, you could be in a position to be the number 1 pick next year as well. And you just don't want to put a quarterback in that position where he doesn't have the requisite weapons to to target. He doesn't have the offensive line to protect him. And what's the biggest thing? What's the biggest knock on Bryce Young? It hasn't been his arm. It hasn't been his ability to throw receivers open. It hasn't been his intelligence. It has been his size. It has been his height, and it's been his weight. So if you don't have a good offensive line, you don't have receivers in place to help your quarterback out, a rookie quarterback, could that persuade them to go to somebody that has a bigger frame, maybe a CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson? Possibly. And they very might do that. But I believe that Bryce Young is the best quarterback in this draft. And I believe that DeMeco Ryans wants to go ahead and get his number one, his franchise player right now. And they have another pick later on in the top 15. So they could possibly trade out of that to get more draft capital. Who knows? But I do believe, despite all the naysayers about his height and his frame, his body frame, I believe that it would behoove the Texans to take Bryce Young with the second overall pick.
All right, Arm, it's on you, bro.
No, that was well put by Mike, man. I think the key building blocks, I was doing key building blocks for the top 4 teams, and there were only 3 key building blocks that I identified for the Texans, which was Pierce, Stingley, and Petrie, who were all named in Nate's video. Obviously, I think the Texans are in a period of post Deshaun Watson, and I agree with Mike that I believe that Bryce Young will be the pick here. Like I said, I think Houston is the only team in the top 10 that I believe is guaranteed to not trade. I do think that a quarterback that they'll like, and I think that Bryce Young is number 1 on their board. He's local, so he's also going to be able to sell tickets in the area. But I do agree it's going to be a lot of a learning curve just with the depletion of talent on their roster, especially with the size concerns with the offensive line being bad. I mean, they drafted Kenyon Green last year with the first of the 3 years of Browns picks they had, and he did not perform very well. So that'll be the responsibility of the offensive line coach, as well as the offensive coordinators, to coach him up and the rest of their line. Like you said, Laramie Tunsil is most likely going to be gone. So it's going to be a whole overhaul. I didn't really contemplate them taking a defensive player, obviously with Caleb Williams coming out in 2024. So that could be an option. But I think right now, just based on the salary cap and moving on from the cloud of the Deshaun Watson era to begin with a new quarterback, and I believe that will be Bryce Young from Alabama.
All right, yeah, but I agree with you guys. They really do have a opportunity to get it together this offseason. They have a ton of draft capital to really start them off with. This really could be the start of their this could be a start of their rebuild in a good way, because if you ask me, I'm sure you guys may agree with this, Jacksonville's a step ahead of everybody in that division, but when you look at Houston, they have the opportunity to be the second best team, because the Colts are kind of probably heading to a rebuild, which we're going to talk about them in a few. And I don't know what to think about the Tennessee Titans at this point. They just, I don't know. The Titans are competitive, but they don't really have much I can say about their future at this point. So, I mean, they're kind of in a better position. I don't know. Would you guys say that?
I think I'm going to disagree with that, Nate. We'll get on the Colts in a few, but I think the Colts, honestly, I think the Colts are a quarterback away from doing some things. They have a lot of talent on that team, and they just really need to figure out getting a young quarterback in there instead of doing the patchwork free agent acquisition trades for quarterbacks.
All right. Okay, so that is it on the Texans. We're about to get ready to cross over to the NFC again and go talk about the Arizona Cardinals. But before we get into it, you guys know where we're going. Let's get this quick stream. As we continue our team-by-team outlook, up next, we discuss the Arizona Cardinals.
Coming into 2022, many expected the Cardinals to be one of the contenders in the NFC. However, the season was a total disaster as the team finished 4-13 and fielded one of the worst defensive units in the league. On top of a bad season, the Cardinals were never fully healthy all year, and personnel changes came with the firing of head coach Cliff Kingsbury. Now the Cardinals look to rebound with a new head coach, former Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon, as he will look to turn around the Cardinals' disastrous season by getting the opportunity to build a roster that has lost several starters over the last few years, including the retirement of legendary Hall of Famer J.J. Watt. Now we discuss their offseason outlook, draft needs, and the direction that the mock drafts are projecting for the Arizona Cardinals.
Simmons down the sideline. Simmons inbound. Thomas getting in. And then Isaiah Simmons cleaning it up and showing you what he can do with the ball in his hand after he comes up with that interception.
All right. I'm gonna let you hit the Cardinals first since I hit the Texans. Or was it Mike? My bad. Yeah, Mike, we're gonna let you lead the Cardinals off.
I think this is so. I've heard some. It was early on in the process that the Cardinals were interested in Bijan Robinson, the running back from Texas. I thought that was kind of interesting. Take a running back because when Kyler Murray got hurt, they were 3-8. You know. And they didn't look good at all with Kyler Murray. So I thought it was kind of interesting that they would even consider taking a running back. But I think that's all been put to bed now. But the Cardinals have been pretty bad. I think Nate said it in the video, they were 31st in points allowed. They weren't even top 20 in points scored this year. So they were in the bottom tier on offense and defense. Like the video said as well, they lost future Hall of Famer J.J. Watt. And Zach Allen, their next best interior player, he's slated to leave for free agency. I believe he had around 5.5, 6 sacks. I think it would behoove them to bring him back. I say that because I have them taking Will Anderson out of Alabama. I believe that he can be some sense of a mentor. And while they do have a lot of issues, and particularly an issue at quarterback. I know he's coming back from an injury, but even before his injury this year, anyways, he didn't look like a franchise quarterback to me. And you know, you had questions in the past about whether he was focused, whether he was football was first. You know, he's always streaming video games and whatnot. You always hear the jokes of he'll rather. He'll be playing this video game on Saturday night instead of, you know, making some adjustments to the playbook or watching film. But yes, I have been going with Will Anderson. They have lost, I believe, J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones in consecutive seasons. That can wreck a defensive line. So what better way than to get, and I mean this in the best possible way possible, a freak, Will Anderson. He just ran at the combine. I think he had a 10-1 split. He had a 4.6 official 40. And someone that big, and someone that I've seen him play up and close. And the only reason I don't have him going number one is just because Jalen Carter is just such an amazing player. And Will is as well, but I think the needs are different for different teams. His circumstances were different. Maybe Will could have gone number one. But I think this is the perfect fit for Will. With the Cardinals, you can't be that bad on defense. If you believe you have a franchise quarterback in Kyler Murray, you have D-Hop. We don't know what the future holds with him. You've heard reports that they may move him. We don't know that to be for certain. They have some holes on offense as well with the offensive line. I don't think they have a long-term player right now at running back. James Conner has been their number one for the last few years, so that may be a need later on in the draft. I think it very could. I think they will draft the running back in this draft, but it's so tricky. You know, I don't believe they have a number one quarterback, a franchise quarterback, but I don't think it's possible for you to. I think it would be ludicrous. I think it would be like a fireable offense for you to draft a quarterback here. So that's why I have them going with Will Anderson. I think he's the best player on the board right now. Yes, they have other needs. Yes, they could probably take the offensive lineman out of Northwestern. But if you're going by best available player, I'm going Will Anderson. I believe that if you put the requisite pieces around him, I think they have some good pieces on the back end in their secondary. But if you put some good pieces around him, which is why I mentioned bringing back Zach Allen, who had 6 sacks last year, because Will was frequently double and triple teamed, and he was what's the word? He was with a running back. He was chipped by running backs and receivers a lot last year. So which is why his numbers were down from his sophomore year where he had 17.5 sacks. But he still won several awards this year. People say he had a down year, but his down year was many players' career year. He had 10 sacks. So he was still a force of nature. He wasn't as impactful because, as I mentioned, he was double, triple team ad nauseum last year. But I think if you build that defensive lineman correctly, he could – I'm not going to say Derek Thomas esque, but he could be pretty darn formidable for that team for the next 5-10 years. So I have them taking Will Anderson.
All right. Yeah. So I agree with you. We kind of got some similar points because Arizona's one of the few teams in the top 5 that's not going quarterback at any means. So they get the opportunity to pick the best player available at that point. And it's also, if I'm the Cardinals, I'm hoping Chicago trades out of number 1 because that would mean that someone's coming up to get a quarterback, depending on the team. So if I'm them, like you said, if I'm the Cardinals, I would love for the best player available to drop to me, which is going to be a Will Anderson or a Jalen Carter. Because as Mike mentioned, they did have one of the worst defensive units in the league last season. And there's only 3 to 4 guys that I look at when I see the Cardinals on defense that I can say these are guys that you have for your future. And one of them is in possibly going to free agency. That's Byron Murphy. But the other guys that you have is Budda Baker, who's a solid safety. Isaiah Simmons is another solid player. And that's pretty much, Marco Wilson had a pretty decent year last year. So you kind of don't have a really bad need in that secondary, but up front, you need everything. So I also agree with the number 1 need for me for the Cardinals is defensive line because losing J.J. Watt, Zach Allen could be going to free agency. I would think that they're going to re-sign him because he was their second best lineman, as Mike mentioned. But they are a team that was 23rd in sacks last year, and you need a guy that's going to generate some pressure in that division. Look at the offenses in that division that you're dealing with. So you better get some pressure on that quarterback because you're dealing with San Francisco. You're dealing with the elite receiving core in Seattle. The Rams still have Cooper Kupp, even though they had a down year. These are still teams in your division alone that you have to worry about. So you better have somebody to get to the quarterback. The next need I have for them is on the offensive line. They could be losing several guys to free agency. They're pretty old on that offensive line. They got Rodney Hudson and a couple of guys like that. You could very well be losing those guys and dealing with a quarterback coming off of an injury that you just paid. You got to protect them. So addressing that offensive line is going to be huge for the Cardinals at some point in this draft. I don't think it'll be at number 3, but I do think they will address it at some point in this draft. My next need for them, as I mentioned, was a corner. I like Marco Wilson. Marco Wilson had a good year for him, but do they lose Byron Murphy to free agency? Because the Cardinals only have $12 million of cap space before they make any cuts or anything like that. They don't have a lot of cap to really go out here and make a splash of free agency. So do they have enough to retain Byron Murphy? We're going to find that out within the next week or two. So that's going to be something to pay attention to. And again, you are in a division with Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, and DK Metcalf. If you don't have anybody that can match up with those guys, good luck. Good luck for the whole season. Because that's 6 games within your division that you're dealing with. those guys. So you better have somebody in there. And Mike mentioned it earlier. I know he mentioned about Bijan Robinson. But I do agree that the Cardinals desperately need to get a running back. I don't like James Conner. I don't think James Conner is a running back one. And I've always had that. To me, I like him in Pittsburgh. I have never liked him in Arizona. And I feel like you need a legitimate 1-2 punch in Arizona, and he's just not it for me. I don't feel like the Cardinals have a great rushing attack. To me, when your quarterback is your second leading rusher, you have a problem. And that's 400 yards from Kyler Murray, when there was 700 yards from James Conner. Not a big fan of his. You need a running back. I don't care where you take that running back, not number 3, of course, but you better get you a running back in this draft. And that could be a space for a Jahmyr Gibbs in the second round or a Bijan, depending on if he does go first or second round. But you better take you a running back in this draft in some capacity. So that's my main needs for him. But as far as the mocks, CBS, 3 of them have them taking Jalen Carter from CBS. Now, Chris Trapasso brought a interesting mock here. He has them trading down with Carolina. He has Carolina trading up to take a quarterback and them going down to number 9 to take Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon, which would also be another great move for the Cardinals. Sports Illustrated has them taking Will Anderson, and so does Walter Football. But again, as we've mentioned, the Cardinals are in a weird spot because these team is just a year removed from going to the playoffs. And now you're kind of in a spot where you got to get some talent around there. D-Hop, as Mike mentioned, might want out. And when you look at the rest of your group, you got Hollywood, who was hurt on and off last year. You got Robbie Anderson, who, you hadn't heard from since he was in Carolina. But again, just look at the group that's in Arizona. And when you're thinking about you put over $200 million into Kyler Murray, you better get some talent out there for that guy. But that's all I have to say about the Cardinals. I'm going to let Arm go ahead and get started on the Cardinals. What are you thinking, sir?
Yeah, the Cardinals, I don't think it's been talked about enough. I think the Cardinals are a wild card for this draft. And based on the scenarios that I provided, I think if I had to make a selection, it would be Jalen Carter. However, I do anticipate a trade will come at number 1. And I would not be surprised at all if the Cardinals traded out of 3 to get more draft picks, especially with the rise of Anthony Richardson. I believe that there is going to be 1 or 2 teams that are going to try to trade up for Anthony Richardson, which we might talk about a little later. But I do believe that the Cardinals have a lot of defensive needs. This is going to be the first season for Jonathan Gannon, who was the former defensive coordinator of the Eagles. If you know the Eagles, they love to get pressure up front. So they like to rush 4. So they're going to definitely look at defensive line. And obviously, I do believe if we do dictate or project a trade, I do think that Will Anderson would be the pick here. But just for this scenario, I would say, suppose if there's not a trade, I would take best defensive player available, which would be Jalen Carter. There is going to be a lot of evaluations with Kyler Murray over the next year. And his intangibles are in a lot of question. Is he the guy that can run a franchise? Is he potentially going to bail on us to go play baseball? That is a legitimate option. If he feels that, hey, my body cannot hold up as a football player, I may go the route of playing baseball. And that's something that the Cardinals potentially may need to prepare for. And I don't know if that's drafting a quarterback in the later rounds, which I think they should, just because you need depth at that position, or they can sign a veteran. But that's going to be the responsibility of not only ownership, but also the new GM as well as the head coach. So I'm very intrigued to see how Arizona is going to navigate, to see where they're going to be at in a year. I would be very intrigued to see where their franchise is going to be in a year from now, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty there with the Cardinals.
You brought up a great point too about Kyler Murray. I forgot all about the baseball thing because we have been hearing it ever since he came into the league, as far as him possibly going to play baseball. BG, hey Mike, what's up? What's going on, bro? What's up, man? But I agree with you. I've been hearing emerging reports too about the Cardinals possibly trading down from 3. And if I was the Cardinals, I would do that as well because, as you said, Anthony Richardson went and lit up the NFL Combine, and now, depending on where he falls to, somebody's gonna feel that pressure. They're gonna want Anthony Richardson in their offense, and like you said, it could be at number 3 where they could possibly trade down. I think it's a couple of potential options of being in a trade down scenario, and I think Arizona may be that one to be in this spot. And like Mike mentioned earlier, the payback of getting pick number 3 is just incredible. So why not trade down? I do agree with that 100%. So I want to ask y'all both this as far as the Cardinals. Do you think of the 4 that we're talking about today, do you think the Cardinals are far off from being back in contention, or do you think they kind of got a long way to go? Where do you kind of see this situation playing out for the Cardinals right now?
I believe they have a far. They're not as bad as the Texans, but I think they have a pretty steep mountain to climb. Just based off of what Armand mentioned with the whole baseball thing, that's a reality. When you draft these guys, that's always a reality. They have a lot of holes on their offense. Nate mentioned that the offensive line is aging. It is. They have a new system coming in with Cliff Kingsbury being an epic failure. I think that they have to get this pick right, and that's something that I didn't really think about, that you could potentially trade back and get more draft capital, because I think, especially with that division is set up, you have an opportunity where the Niners could just run. Well, the Niners into Seattle. Seattle's going to be there. They had a better than expected year last year. They have some young players in that secondary, and they have a high draft pick this year too. They hit that pick. Watch out for Seattle. I think they're going to be looking for a quarterback in the near future too, if they don't think Geno is the guy. But Geno, for right now, Geno has them in contention to win that division and make the playoffs. But the biggest question mark in that division is the Rams. Do the Rams trade Jalen Ramsey? What happens with Aaron Donald? He was contemplating retirement after the Super Bowl. The Cardinals have an opportunity to kind of move up in that totem pole faster than the Rams, because the Rams are kind of in flux right now. Or do they want to contend? Do they want to hit the reset button? They kind of can't with their cap situation with Matthew Stafford and whatnot. But that's a bad situation to be in, because the Seattle, they're somewhat young. They have a lot of young pieces. 49ers have a Super Bowl contender. The Cardinals could be looking at a 2 to 3 year reset. That's just the reality. So it could be even worse if they don't have their franchise quarterback, if he decides to, they decide to move on from him, or if he decides to protect his body and go the baseball route. So yeah, I think they could be in for a long run.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think that the Cardinals are, if I'm looking at it from an NFC West perspective, I think they're the worst team in the division. You also have to factor, we talked about the Rams. You have 2 things. Number 1 is LA. Everybody wants to go play LA. State-of-the-art facilities. The combine is going to go to LA in the near future. The second thing, big question, is Sean McVay going to be there? That's a legit thing. We see a lot of coaches who are transitioning to NFL analyst jobs where they're getting 8-figure deals, and I can't knock that at all. But I do think that with the new coach coming in, you have to instill a lot of culture, and that takes time. And if Kyler doesn't recover from this injury, or decides that he doesn't want to play football or even be with the Cardinals, that's going to be devastating. That's going to be devastating to Arizona. They're going to, it's not even 2 to 3 years. It's going to be 5 years, a reset, just based on a rookie scale. That's going to be devastating. And we just don't know his commitment to football. I think that's ultimately going to be the main question.
Hey, that's a great point that you hit. Tevin, what's going on, bro? Check name from Facebook said, so does the Cardinals trade back or take a DN? Lots of talent. We just hit that for you. We basically played both scenarios out for you earlier.
I believe they take a Will Anderson, but Armand made a great point. I think they could possibly trade back. So I think that's out of all of our our thoughts and whatnot predictions. I think Armand was spot on. I think they potentially trade back. So to answer Tevin's question.
Yeah, Mike brought up a great point about Bijan Robinson in a trade back. You don't take a running back top 3 anymore. We don't do that. That's fireable. But I do think with 4 quarterbacks in the draft that can go, I don't think there's a quarterback going past 6. All the quarterbacks will be gone. So if you're the Cardinals and if you're looking at your current state, you need to take advantage of teams that are going to be desperate. There's the Lions potentially, although they have Jared Goff. You have the Raiders at 7. You have the Falcons at 8, depending on what they're going to do, if they're going to trade for Lamar Jackson or not. And then the team behind them that's in their division, the Panthers, who just recouped a lot of draft picks for Christian McCaffrey. And they have an owner in David Tepper who is ready to get his quarterback. He spent a lot of money on that team. And I think the Panthers might be trading up really high. It might not be good for Nate's team, but I think that the Panthers might come up to number 1, and they're going to take C.J. Stroud. So watch out for that.
That's an interesting point that you just made about the Panthers, too. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do as far as their direction. I know we're going to talk about them in another show coming up. And as Armand just mentioned, if I was in the Cardinals GM position, I put out there, I may even put it in the media, we trade back. Because if I'm Arizona, I'm looking at the fact of, not only am I looking at what these guys just mentioned, look in your division. Seattle has picked 5 in their own first round pick. We're going to talk about them. Seattle's coming in our next show. Detroit won 9 games and is picking 6 and picking another top 20 pick. You got 2 potential teams right there whose future is looking bright from trades that they did when they were struggling, but they've been putting it together. If you're the Arizona Cardinals, you kind of want to put yourself in that same predicament. You're not better than the 49ers or the Seahawks right now. You know this is clear. Like Armand said, the Rams, you don't really know what's going on with that team. So if you're the Cardinals, I can get several pieces. Oh, I forgot one other team. The defending NFC champions are in the top 10. As they're going to talk about them at some point later down the road. You got all these teams that are heading in a positive direction that has the capital in the draft to do something. You better put yourself in that position because you don't have the money to really go out here and address what you need to address this offseason. So the draft better be your fun time. And like Armand mentioned, if I'm the Cardinals, someone's going to get very, very happy about Anthony Richardson. He's going to probably try to happily skip their tail to number 3. And I would gladly give it to him. So that's really where I stand on that too. If I'm like these guys, I would trade back. But getting ready to hit the last but not least team on this show, the Indianapolis Colts. But before we dive into the Colts, one coming before I go to the Colts. KD Bailey checking in said the Cardinals will also have Kyler miss for at least part of the season. They need all they can get. Great point. All right, but before we dive into the Indianapolis Colts, let's see one last preview. Here goes the Colts.
Last but not least, we will discuss the Indianapolis Colts. Entering 2022, many people expected to see the Colts make a run for the postseason or even possibly win the AFC South after adding former NFL MVP Matt Ryan in a trade from the Atlanta Falcons to run the show. However, it was a total disaster as the Colts finished 4-12-1. Midway through the season, the Colts went through several quarterback changes and Frank Reich was fired. And former legendary player Jeff Saturday became the head coach and didn't do much better, including a 1-7 record and blowing one of the biggest leads in regular season history, which also cost him from getting another opportunity. Now the Colts have decisions to ponder this offseason, but there is one thing that is for certain. A franchise quarterback will be a part of their plan. Now, we will discuss the outlook on the offseason for the Indianapolis Colts, their draft needs, and the current mock projections, and so much more. Last but not least, let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts.
Intercepted on the deflection, and the Colts are going to upset the Kansas City Chiefs. Oh my goodness!
All right, last but not least, the Indianapolis Colts. Okay, I'm going to lead it off. Their first need is clear, is a quarterback. By the way, Colts, thank you very much. I love you, Matt Ryan. But thank you very much for giving us a third-round pick to get that contract off our team. And I promise you, if Matt Ryan would have played like he did in 2022 for the Indianapolis Colts in Atlanta, you would have never heard the end of it on the radio. He had his by far his worst season as a professional in Indianapolis, and got himself benched for Nick Foles, for Sam Ehlinger. Like, that situation was ugly in Indianapolis. So they definitely will need to get them a quarterback in the worst way possible. They could be the team to trade at number one, and I wouldn't blame them. They need a quarterback bad. The Texans are going to be looking for a quarterback as well, but they need one bad. And sadly, the team is still been a quarterback away from really being a really good team because you have Jonathan Taylor in your backfield. But of course, can't get anything going when you're looking like the 2021 Falcons last season out there in Indianapolis, because that's exactly what they were. They were the 2021 Falcons. So quarterback is going to be a big need. They could be cutting Matt Ryan this offseason. Matt Ryan would save them $17.2 million, but his cut would cost them $18 million because Matt Ryan has a big payday due to him in 2023, regardless if he's on a roster or not. So, hey, if I'm Matt Ryan, I wouldn't be trying to lead the NFL no time soon after this contract right here. But anyways, moving on to the next need, offensive line. This unit, that was the unit that I truly was shocked with how bad they were. They allowed 60 sacks last season, which is crazy to think about. The Colts had a pretty good offensive line, but last year they were pretty bad. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they had instability on that line. They have Quentin Nelson and Braden Smith, but outside of that, their line has been up and down. Like, they had a retirement. I cannot remember the lineman name that retired on them before 2022, but they had a recent retirement. They actually had one of the best offensive lines in the league at one point, but they were far from it last year. So adding a guard or a tackle would be huge this offseason if you're the Indianapolis Colts. They got a little bit of money to work with, but the offensive line depth is not that deep in the free agency class. You may have to really look to the draft in this case. So I think that's one of their big needs. Defensive end, they did find something special with Kwity Paye and Day. I'm not going to mess your last name up. You just know who I'm talking about. But they still have Yannick is going to be leaving in free agency, and they need depth on that defensive line. They really need the help they can get there. That's going to probably be a second round need. They will definitely not go number 4 and get that, of course. Wide receiver, despite the early concerns with that group, they actually was okay. But Michael Pittman almost had 1,000 yards. Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati had a pretty good year. Paris Campbell, the Ohio State native, had a pretty good year, but he's going to be in free agency. They may not re-sign him. So you may need another receiver to go with your new franchise quarterback, because you're going to get a franchise quarterback without question. And a shocking need for everyone could be, and I know this may shock you guys, is cornerback for me. Yes, they have Gilmore and Kenny Moore, but Gilmore's contract's up at the 23, and so is Kenny Moore. They may cut Kenny Moore. So that could be a position to watch out for. They may even trade those guys this offseason. So be on the lookout for that. But CBS Sports have, this is the funny thing about it, every one of their analysts have them trading up with the Bears to take a quarterback. Two of them have them taking Bryce Young. One of them have them taking Anthony Richardson at number 1. And another one have them staying at 4 to take Will Levis. Also, Sports Illustrated have them trading up to number 1 to take CJ Stroud. And Walter Football has them taking Bryce Young at number 4. But that's my take on the Colts. I'm going to let whoever want to go next hit the Colts.
I can go. So although you listed off all those lovely needs for the Colts, we know what the need is here. The need is quarterback. They've had Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, and Matt Ryan. 3 years. Last 3 years have been an utter disaster at quarterback for the Colts. And we know Jim Irsay is very impatient. And I think this is the year that they're going to get their quarterback. The Colts are a very, very lucky franchise. I don't know what it is when it comes to needing a quarterback. You just abruptly become, hey, we need a quarterback. And guess what? We fall into Peyton Manning. We fall into Andrew Luck. Now we're going to fall into one of these 4 quarterbacks. So they just have a very, very good luck when it comes to knowing when quarterbacks are going to be in the draft. With their coach being Shane Steichen, the former offensive coordinator from the Eagles, I think that he's going to want to potentially replicate what they had at Philadelphia. They have a potential all-pro running back in Jonathan Taylor. Why not go for a home run and potentially grab Anthony Richardson, who is similar to Jalen Hurts in terms of a physical attributes? You get him in a system where, you leverage his mobility, but also use his deep playability with the receivers, especially Alec Pierce, who ran a 4.3 last year in the combine. You have a 50-50 ball winner in Michael Pittman. And if they can find a slot guy who can man the position if Paris Campbell doesn't come back, they'll be fine there. And don't forget, they also have Jelani Woods, the tight end out of Virginia, who was 6'7". So you just throw it up there and he'll may find a way to come down. But I definitely think a quarterback. I think Richardson is strongly in play here, and I think it's between him and possibly Levis and CJ Stroud. I don't think that they're a Bryce Young team. I don't see that. They like big, sturdy quarterbacks who are mobile. So I believe that if it came down to it, I think it's going to come down between Richardson and Stroud.
I agree with the 2 quarterbacks that you pinpointed on mine, Levis and Richardson. Those were my guys. But I'm going a little different route. We've heard ad nauseum that the Colts could potentially trade up. I have a theory they're going to trade back. And that team is, both of you have mentioned, the Carolina Panthers. I think both teams are going to get their franchise quarterback. But in this scenario, we're going with what we have now. And I think the Colts' new franchise quarterback, Will Levis. Here's why. They had a pretty darn good defense. I don't think defense is in play for them. They were 30th in points per game on offense. They were 28th in points allowed per game in defense, but the defense only allowed the 15th most yards. They had a pretty good defense, but the offense constantly put pressure on the defense, put them in bad situations, which, led to them being 28th in points allowed per game. It takes me back to the Sunday Night Football game, Colts versus the Cowboys. I think Matt Ryan threw like 5 or 6 interceptions. Nick Foles got put in a couple of weeks later, had just as bad as a performance. It's only so much a defense can do if your offense is not if they're constantly having 3 and outs, they're constantly putting you in bad positions with turnovers and whatnot. So yes, I have their needs being quarterback, O-line, and receiver. Same pretty much across the board. Their offensive line actually, I don't think it's as bad as the numbers suggest. They have Quentin Nelson, who's a former All-Pro. They have some good pieces. They have Ryan Kelly at center, who they drafted in the top 3 rounds, I believe, a couple of years ago. He's pretty solid offensive lineman. I think their issue was, and which is why they brought in Tony Sperano Jr. He's their new offensive line coach. I think the scheme, and I think bringing him in with his background, I think you're going to see a substantial improvement with the offensive line play. You also had Jonathan Taylor. He was banged up most of the year. It was a very disappointing year for him compared to his previous season. If you get him healthy, you have some weapons on the outside. Paris Campbell is a potential free agent. I believe they're going to draft a receiver in the draft somewhere along the lines. You have your red zone target, your guy that can go on one-on-one jump ball, Michael Pittman Jr. You have Alec Pierce, who had developed a really good rapport with Matt Ryan throughout. If you looked at his numbers, he actually had his best games when Matt Ryan was quarterback, which leads me to believe that when you have a quarterback that knows what he's doing, can get you the ball where you want, when you have a rapport, you have this relationship with him that you develop throughout training camp and whatnot, off season. I believe that Alec Pierce could be in the role with Paris Campbell, having him a big breakout year like Paris Campbell did, that set him up for a pretty good payday. So the Colts' new coach, he has a relationship with somebody, a former quarterback that he used to coach for, Coach Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers, big guy, strong arm, he just knows the game. And I believe that if you look at the past history of the Colts, they like their quarterbacks pretty big. They like those. That's why I say I never had imagined them drafting up to get a Bryce Young. And while C.J. Stroud is a little bit bigger than Bryce Young, he doesn't fit that mold of a prototype for a quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, which is why I have Will Levis. Will Levis has a lot of issues with being inconsistent, making poor decisions. He reminds me kind of Sam Darnold, the quarterback for the Panthers now. Sam Darnold coming out of USC, he had a strong arm. He had a lot of height, but he had a lot of issues with turning the ball over. And that translated to the NFL, which is why he struggled with the Jets and which is why he is where he is now. But I believe that the Colts have a plan in place. I struggle with this pick because Anthony Richardson was a pick that I was like, after that combine, I was like, oh, the Colts. Armand just mentioned it. What Jalen Hurts did in Philadelphia in that scheme. So why not go with somebody that has a similar frame? It's a little bit tall, a little bit bigger, but all in all, they can do some of the same things. But I started looking at some more Will Levis tapes, strong arm, just like Anthony Richardson. And he's very mobile. He's very mobile. Like, I think that's something that's very underrated in his game. And this is my hot take. He has a little bit of Josh Allen in him. I'm not saying he's going to be Josh Allen. I'm not saying he's going to have the type of career trajectory as Josh Allen, but he has some of that in him. Whether he lives up to that, who knows? But right now, what are we doing? We're drafting off of potential, right? We think Anthony Richardson could be this. We think Bryce Young could be this. C.J. Stroud. Well, if I'm the Colts, you got a rookie head coach. You have some pieces on defense. You have an all-pro running back. You have offensive line that is not one of the worst in the leagues. I mean, statistics show that it was last year, but I believe in the guys they have on that front line, and I feel that they can go in free agency maybe or draft some guys to help shore it up. You have some weapons on at receiver. You might need a couple more speed receivers to keep the defense honest, although Alec Pierce did run a 4.3 last year at the combine. But I haven't taken Will Levis. Will Levis is the guy that I think could be their next franchise guy that follows the career path of a Peyton Manning to a Andrew Luck. I think that's their mindset. If I had to get into their brains and figure out what they were thinking, I think they want to go with Will Levis. You can't go wrong with Will Levis or C.J. Stroud. Anthony Richardson, he's a wild card. He could be the best quarterback in the draft. He could also be the quarterback pick selection that could get the GM fired. Will Levis could as well. So yeah, I'm going with Will Levis here. That's my hot take. They're going to trade back with the Carolina Panthers. Panthers get their quarterback Anthony Richardson, and the Colts get Will Levis.
All right. Let me hit these comments real quick. Darrell, basically, what's going on? Darrell said they ran the wheels off of Jonathan Taylor. I like that wide receiver group just need a quarterback. Basically, you kind of hitting the same thing that we said. Also, might need a defensive back too. Father Time's group. That is true. He has been in the league for a while, so that's definitely along the lines of some of the needs that we did hit for those 4 teams. But those are the 4 teams that we said we were going to cover today. The next 4 we're going to cover when we come back is going to be Seattle, Detroit, Las Vegas, and Carolina. We're going to get a chance to talk about those. A couple of those teams have double picks, so we'll get a chance to talk about those teams too. But before we get ready to wrap it up, guys, what are your thoughts on the combine this weekend? Did anybody when we get ready to come back on this show in a couple of days or so, will we be changing up who's going to be in that top 5? Did someone just make a name for themselves this week, or what are you guys thinking so far?
And I think the winner was the corner, Manuel Forbes out of Mississippi State, the corner, and then Anthony Richardson. I don't think either of those two make it to shake up what we have predicted so far today. I don't think they move up that immensely, but they definitely moved up a lot of draft boards. I don't think anything that I saw at the draft combine greatly changes what we have today. I think I had Jalen Carter, Bryce Young, 2, Will Anderson, and Will Levis. Nolan, the linebacker for Georgia, Nolan Smith, who broke the internet with his 40 time. I think that he can move up, maybe even close to the top 10. I think more realistically, he's going to be a top 20-ish pick. Some mock drafts had him outside the first round for the combine, but I think he made himself a lot of money the other day. But I don't foresee anything shaking up the top 4.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's going to be a significant shakeup with the top 4. I definitely think Anthony Richardson definitely stole the headlines just with the vertical jump, the broad jump, the 40 time, just a culmination of everything that he did. I think that's really going to get him in at least the top 6 situation, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on the Lions, the Raiders, the Falcons potentially, and the Panthers. It's pretty much 6 through 9. There's going to be a lot of deliberation in those front offices to see, are we going to potentially trade up to the top 5 to get this QB? I'm glad you brought up Nolan Smith, Mike. I think Nolan Smith made him a lot of money. I think he might be a top 20 pick now, based on that. And if you look at Georgia's team, I know we talked about Jalen Carter a lot. Nolan Smith was arguably before this season happened was their best defensive player. Is that correct, Nate?
That is correct, sir.
Oh, yeah. So me watching, I saw a lot of Nolan Smith, and he has tremendous bend off the edge. I think he can really thrive in a 3-4 defense, or put his hand in the dirt on third down situations and just rush the quarterback. So I think he made a lot of money this weekend.
Okay, I do agree with you guys. I don't think anybody's going to change the top 4. I do agree with Nolan Smith making a name for himself. I think a person that might have worked himself back into the first round, I'm going to throw out another Georgia player. Yesterday, I think Darnell Washington might have secured himself as potentially the best tight end in his class over Michael Mayer. And I think Michael Mayer is going to be a really solid tight end, but all of the physical attributes and everything that this man brings to the table, and he ran a 4.6 at that height and weight. That just, that blows scouts away. So I think that's a potential player. And as Armand mentioned, I think Anthony Richardson might have squeaked his way potentially into that top 10. I don't know if it's top 4 yet. We'll see how everything kind of shakes up in the next couple of days. But I think those are a couple of guys that impressed during the combine. I don't really know if anyone impressed. I know it's the running backs and offensive linemen today. So we may have another person that we might mention in a couple of days when we come back with the show. But other than that, guys, do you have anything else that you would like to hit on before we get ready to wrap this up?
No, all I can say is just really pay attention to the next couple of weeks with free agency. Typically at the combine, there are a lot of conversations between agents and GMs that's kind of quote unquote informal tampering, just to gauge the market of different players. I know there were a lot of reports about certain teams being interested in certain players. We know Jalen Ramsey's on the block. We've also heard that my Browns are potentially going to go after a big free agent. I don't know how they're going to do that with the money situation that we have going on. And there might be some other players that might be some surprising cuts, such as like Bengals running back Joe Mixon has been thrown out there. So we'll just pay attention over the next couple of weeks just to see what will happen. And obviously the quarterback domino effect with David Carr and other quarterbacks who are Aaron Rodgers looking for jobs. So pay attention.
Some very good points. I want to mention, because I mentioned this earlier to Nate off the air, but Keenan Allen had originally earlier in the offseason, they were stating that maybe he could be a cut casualty, but the GM has since come out and said that he's going to be a part of their team next year. But as we have seen in prior off seasons, there's going to be one big name that nobody could have foreseen, not being a part of their current team. He's going to be cut. Maybe it may not be a player of Bobby Wagner's stature like last year, but there's going to be a pretty big name that's going to be cut this year, and there's going to be a long line of teams lining up to try to court them. I also want to mention that there's a few players that have legal situations going on as well, so that could also impact what teams may do. I know Alvin Kamara with the Saints. He's I think the court case, he has been formally charged, and they're going to go to court. I believe this offseason. So we how the NFL code of conduct is, and even if you're not criminally convicted, punished under the code. So that may shape how things are going. The Saints going to be active. They're in win now mode to their organization. They have pieces together, and if they could potentially lose Alvin Kamara for a substantial amount of time, maybe they might be changing their draft strategy. And maybe not. They might be in the running to get Bijan Robinson at running back. Who knows? But just keep in mind that there are some players that have some legal issues. I know Joe Mixon was in some an issue a couple of weeks ago, I believe right after the Super Bowl. So just pay attention to what's going on, because everything is not set in stone yet. Even though teams have who they believe they're going to draft, you never know what can happen. So just stay in the loop.
Yes, sir. Oh, one last thing. What's going on? Blakey said, don't forget about that one-handed catch. That catch was ridiculous. I think they're also set the internet on fire last night for Darnell Washington. But I do agree with everything that you guys have said. This is going to be an interesting next couple of weeks. And, of course, like I just mentioned, we will be getting ready to hit Seattle, Detroit, Vegas, and Carolina on the next show. The Birds are going to get their own show because the Lord knows they need it for a freaking hour. But with that being said, this has been the first mock draft show of 2023. These guys will definitely be back with me, and I appreciate everyone that's been tuned in from the start and everyone that came in and popped out. So With that being said, you all have a great Sunday. And until next time, this has been another episode of All In With Nate, a mock draft edition with my boys Mike and Armand. Y'all have a great Sunday.